All right, our next speaker is Mark Abel, who is, give it up for Mark. For Mark's fans in the house. All right, so Mark, I'll tell them who you are. Mark is chair of Brighton UCU, he's faculty member there, and he's a UCU national pay negotiator.
For my sins. The first thing I want to say is that those of us on strike at Brighton have had fantastic support from our students, despite the fact that our student union tried to stop them supporting us, and there are many of them here, so I just wanted to make that clear. And we really value that support. Fantastic. The worst thing about being on strike for 8 days, I think, is not getting drowned out on the first 3 days by heavy rain and then subsequently frozen by freezing temperatures, or the pay docking that we're gonna suffer in the new year when they finally get round to it. It's actually, for me anyway, the prospect of going back to work on Thursday. Because I don't know how everybody else feels, but this has been a liberatory experience. Yeah. I know some of you, those of you from Sussex have done this before in terms of lots of days on strike, and we're no stranger at Brighton to being on strike. But to be honest, we'd done a maximum of 1.5 days before we were ready to do more, but we actually won. So what can you do? You have to go back to work. So 8 days makes it feel different. It creates a kind of alternative reality, doesn't it? We start to control our own lives in a way that we don't before. It gets us out from the suffocating, oppressive atmosphere of the university, the increasing managerialism that we all suffer. And it gives us a chance to experiment with other kinds of education. The teach outs have been fantastic. And just to echo something the last speaker said, it gives us a glimpse of what education could be like, you know, without a difference between those learning and those teaching, where we all learn together. So it's been fantastically liberatory. And I think people have enjoyed. We've had the chance to talk to each other as colleagues in a way that we've never done before, and our student supporters and all the rest of it. Now, many people have commented on how happy people have seemed on the picket line. I mean, it's true, isn't it? There's smiles on everybody's faces, people laughing and joking, and we get accused of fighting in our own selfish interests. That's the argument, isn't it? Our heads of school on Friday put out a series of emails, all identical to each other, congratulating and thanking the staff that are still working, and unfortunately there are some lecturers still working at Brighton University, for caring enough about the students and looking after the student experience. Well, hang on a minute. We're not the ones behaving selfishly here. And this is what they don't understand about our dispute. What we have is we have male colleagues fighting for the earnings of women and to close the gender pay gap. That's not selfish behaviour. We have those of us lucky enough to be on permanent or long-term contracts fighting for the interests of those of us who are on insecure contracts. That's not selfish behaviour. We have white colleagues fighting for BAME staff and to close the race pay gap and against the racism of universities. And while I mention racism, the Brighton UCU strike committee took a decision the other day to support a protest against Donald Trump, who you may know has arrived, I'm not quite sure, in Britain again today, and will be here tomorrow for a NATO summit. So a protest has been called at the Clock Tower tomorrow at 5:30. It's supported by Brighton UCU. Hopefully Sussex people will support it, students and so on as well. See you at the Clock Tower tomorrow. And even when it comes to our pay and our pensions, which is supposedly the selfish bit of this, even that isn't true, because what are we fighting for? It's not true that we are thinking about our own individual pay packets or our own individual pension pots when we fight over these things. What we're fighting against is the steady decline of those things that will affect the next generation of staff coming through into education. So we don't have a situation where every new generation of academics and others coming into the system earns progressively less than we did and the people that came before us. So even that part of it is not selfish. Even there we're thinking about other people, and we're thinking about the future of higher education and its sustainability as a decent, fair, free education system. So make no mistake, when we're fighting for all of these things, for pensions, for pay, against casualisation, against pay gaps, and for decent workloads, in effect, we are fighting across the board against the effects of the marketisation of education. This is a strike against the neoliberalisation of higher education. We're not allowed to go on strike and say we're fighting against the marketisation of education, but effectively that is what we are doing by challenging all its pernicious and corrosive effects. And that's why it's important to keep all these issues together, and why it would be madness to split them up, to split the two. We've got two legally distinct disputes, but it's one big fight, right? And to split those up, as some people unfortunately are arguing, would be a great mistake, I think. We call our pay and equality fight the 4 fights, and we also have a pension fight, but really we have the 5 fights, right? Pension, pay, casualisation, pay gaps, and workload. And they're all together, and they need to stay together. I was one of the UCU negotiator delegation that met UCIA, the employers' organisation, last Tuesday. So this was day 2 of the strike, and it was already clear after one day strike that we had their attention, and they knew that they had to meet us, and they also knew that they couldn't continue to try and pretend that they had disposed of the question of the headline pay figure by imposing 1.8% on us. That was what that imposition was about. Here it is, take it, that's it, we're not talking about any more. But they recognised that they couldn't do that, and that 1.8 figure is also on the table still in terms of negotiation. They're reluctant to move on it, but they know it's there on the table. And moreover, they also showed a willingness, which hadn't been there before, to talk seriously about the other aspects of our claim. You'll know that previously their line has been, we don't have a mandate to discuss these things with you. We are not set up to speak on behalf of individual university managements to talk about casualisation or gender pay gaps or workload. If you want to do anything about that, go and talk to them individually as individual branches. That's been their line. And it's an attempt really to narrow down the scope of the Jinch's negotiating framework, which is the acronym for the pay negotiations, to simply the headline pay figure and to try not to address anything else, which of course is consistent with marketisation. It's consistent with the notion of universities in competition with each other. It's designed to allow a race to the bottom to occur over contracts, over pay gaps and all the rest of it, because that's what a competitive market needs to do. It needs to create differentiation. And that's why we're right to insist that we fight on these things on a national basis and don't allow that race to the bottom. That we insist to the National Employers Organisation is that we want some agreements over casualisation. Why can't they agree, for instance, and this would be a first step, it wouldn't be any means by the end of the story, why can't we have an agreement whereby there are no 0 hours contracts in any university in Britain? They could agree that. And by doing that, we would be insisting that we are still a national higher education sector with common agreements across the board. And we could come up with other things to do with promotions procedures that don't disadvantage women, don't disadvantage black staff, and so on. We could have an agreement, for instance, that says that student feedback data, which there's tons of research on, that shows that it's discriminatory, that it tends to discriminate against female staff, BAME staff, disabled staff, gay staff, and so on, that none of that feedback is ever used in any promotion procedure in any university in the country. We could get a national agreement on that. So this has become a crucial front in the dispute. Are we going to yield to the logic of the market and allow a race to the bottom on contracts and workloads and so on? Or are we going to insist on national agreements that do things like banning 0 hours, that limit hourly paid contracts, that put a ceiling on teaching hours? We have a ceiling on our teaching hours in post-92 universities. Why can't that be extended across to pre-92 universities? All these things are possible, and the UCU needs to go back to its members. They have gone back to their members since last Tuesday, and they need to seek a mandate from those universities to say that they can negotiate over those things, and if they don't negotiate over those things, there will be no peace, no industrial peace in universities. So we need to stand strong. We need to make sure that the last 2 days of our action, days 7 and 8, are as solid as our first 6 days have been. When we return to work on Thursday, I think we need to impose our work to contract rigorously, and make sure we don't do anything that begins to catch up on the stuff that we've lost over the last 8 days, because we're not going to be paid for those 8 days, so why would we catch up with that work? You'll have heard that a number of branches have started reballoting, or they will start to reballot later this week. On Thursday, I think, or Wednesday, the reballoting starts in a number of branches. And we need that, because we need to show that the dispute is escalating, that more branches, the ones that missed it just by a few votes, are being drawn into the fight for any second wave that we need to do in the new term. So we go back to work on Thursday, but I don't think we go back to business as usual. We need to remain on a war footing, because this fight goes on and it's not over yet. We need to prepare for the next round in the battle. And I think we need to make it clear to the employers that our resolve will not weaken, that these issues will not go away, and that they need to address our concerns, all of our concerns, if they want industrial peace in their universities. This is a fight of our lives. It's a fight for the future of higher education itself, and we can win it. Thank you.